The elderly man stepped into the courtroom, his wrists shackled, the cuffs quietly tapping together like a somber rhythm from the past. His sun-weathered face, deeply etched by time, hung low as if burdened by a lifetime of loss. "Please state your name." The clerk's voice echoed through the cold room. He responded, his voice trembling like wind whistling through stone. "Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." No one in that courtroom could have predicted that within minutes a truth would surface that would leave the entire room in silence. From the bench above, the judge methodically turned the pages of the case file with composed hands, but when she reached the defendant's military record, her hand froze. A name, a memory, surged to the surface. Her face went pale. Elias Carter. He was the man who once carried her brother out of a hail of bullets in Fallujah, where the brutality of war had once buried all traces of humanity. Elias sat quietly, 69 years old, his frail frame seeming drained of life by the darkness of the past. His tattered, oversized military jacket swallowed his once strong shoulders that had once carried the weight of an entire squad. Under the courtroom lights, each wrinkle stood out like a time-worn engraving, every line telling an untold story. Of loss, of sacrifice, of the silence of veterans forgotten by society. Once he wore his uniform proudly, his chest adorned with medals. Today he awaited judgment wearing clothing donated from a charity clothes drive. The contrast between those two moments wasn't just a tale of one man's downfall. It was a powerful reminder of how this nation treats those who once gave everything for it. As the words Marine Corps, Iraq echoed through the courtroom, the air seemed to tighten. Those words fell heavy into the space like stones, awakening deeply buried memories within Elias. A pride long repressed found the tiniest sliver of air, a fleeting moment in which to breathe, to exist. Judge Olivia Parker, still buried in the thick file, paused again at the military section. Something in Elias's service record made her hand tremble, a detail that fractured the composed facade she had maintained for 20 years. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A sharply dressed man entered wearing a custom navy blue suit, his leather shoes gleaming, silver cufflinks catching the light. He strode confidently to the defense table, set down his briefcase, and looked toward the judge. "Your Honor, my name is Alexander Ross. I've just been appointed to represent Mr. Carter." The room fell into stunned silence. Elias turned toward him, confused. He hadn't hired an attorney, let alone someone who radiated such success and refinement. Judge Parker narrowed her eyes, wary. "This is highly irregular. The court has not been informed of any change in legal representation." "This is an urgent development," Ross replied calmly, his voice steady and clear. "I respectfully request a 15-minute recess to confer with my client." Judge Parker studied both men intently, as if reading the thoughts they kept hidden. Finally, she gave a slight nod and retreated to her chambers, leaving behind a hush. Elias leaned toward Ross. "I can't afford this," he whispered, as though ashamed to admit it. Ross leaned in, his voice low and reassuring, like an old friend. "You don't have to. Our firm, Williams, Ross & Parker, is handling this pro bono." Elias stared, stunned. "Parker?" he repeated. Ross nodded. "Yes, the same Parker." In the chambers behind the bench, Judge Olivia Parker sat at her desk, removing her glasses, hands trembling slightly. 20 years on the bench had taught her how to remain composed like stone, but today, that stone was starting to crack. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. In it, a young Olivia stood next to her brother. Lieutenant Jack Parker, a Marine with resolute eyes in full uniform, his arm protectively around his sister. Beside the photo lay a yellowed letter, time-worn. The final letter Jack sent from Iraq, before he never came home. The ink had faded, but Olivia remembered every word. In it, Jack described a brutal firefight outside Fallujah. His unit was surrounded, facing annihilation. But then, a sergeant known only by the nickname Quinn had charged through enemy fire, dragged a wounded Marine out, and single-handedly covered their retreat. "If it weren't for him," Jack had written, "you wouldn't have a brother to be proud of today." She had read that letter hundreds of times over the years. Jack never had the chance to finish the story. He was killed by an IED just weeks later. Olivia still remembered the funeral, the folded flag handed to her parents, the shattered silence in their eyes, and the young Marine who approached them, guilt weighing heavily in his gaze. "Your son saved my life," he had said. "I was the one he carried that day." He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. That name, Mason Quinn, had never faded from Olivia's memory. Years later she had tried to find him, desperate to hear more about her brother's final moments, but the military told her he had re-enlisted immediately after the incident. Later they said he had been discharged with severe injuries, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and then disappeared from their records. And now, 2 decades later, that same man, Mason Quinn, or rather Elias Carter, was sitting in her courtroom. No one else recognized him, but Olivia knew without a doubt. Just then, a gentle knock pulled her from the storm of memories. Ross entered, his face lined with concern. "Olivia, what is going on?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and worry. As her lifelong friend and once her husband's law partner, Ross was among the few who still called her by her first name. "It's him, Alex," Olivier said, pointing to the photo on her desk. "The Marine who carried Jack out of that ambush." Ross froze, his face shifting as the truth set in. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom?" He paused. "That's Elias Carter. He's the one you've been searching for all these years?" Olivia nodded slowly. "The military records confirm it. Fallujah, 2004, same unit as Jack. He was awarded the Silver Star for the very battle Jack wrote about in his letter." "Does he recognize you?" Ross asked. "Probably not. I took my husband's last name after law school. He wouldn't know me now. It's been 20 years. Olivia clenched her fists, her voice somber. How does a hero like that end up here? How does someone who saved his brothers in arms end up on trial just for trying to find somewhere warm to survive the night? Ross shook his head, eyes filled with sorrow. Talking to him, I could feel he's endured more than most ever will. Severe PTSD after his last deployment. His wife left while he was overseas. Benefits got tangled in bureaucracy. Worked construction for years until an injury took him out. Then came the job loss, the eviction, and the streets. Olivia closed her eyes. In her mind, she could hear Jack's voice again, young and full of hope. From that old letter, Carter is the best of us. A soldier willing to give everything for his brothers. If you ever meet someone half as good as him, be proud. Ross spoke gently. You can recuse yourself from the case. No one would blame you. No, Olivia said firmly. I won't let him disappear again, but you know the ethical risk. I do, she interrupted, sitting up straighter, her gaze now unwavering. But there are also moral obligations, especially to those who gave their lives to this country. When Judge Parker returned to the courtroom, her posture was unshaken. Her voice ran clear and firm. Her face was as composed as ever, but those who knew her well could see it, the subtle tremor in her hands as she adjusted the stack of papers on the bench. Mr. Ross, Judge Parker said, her tone regaining its formal sternness. Has your client reached a decision? Ross stood, his demeanor calm and assured. Yes, Your Honor. We moved to dismiss all charges. Mr. Carter did not trespass. He was merely trying to survive a brutal winter night, and we can demonstrate that a restaurant employee informally permitted him to stay near the premises. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Judge Parker raised her hand to stop him. The room fell silent. I have a few questions for the defendant, she said, shifting her gaze to Elias. A look that no longer held distance, but something deeper. Mr. Carter, your military records state clearly, Fallujah, 2004, is that correct? Elias nodded slowly, his posture instinctively straightening, a reflex ingrained through years of service. Yes, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. On April 17 of that year, were you involved in an operation near the western edge of the city? A flicker of hesitation crossed Elias's weathered face, but then the memory broke through like light-cutting fog. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when we were ambushed. And during that firefight, did you rescue a wounded officer, Lieutenant Jack Parker, under heavy fire? The air in the courtroom froze. That name, Parker, cut through like a blade, opening a door to long-buried memories. Elias squinted, a storm of recollection swirling behind his tired eyes. Parker, he whispered, like summoning a distant ghost. That's right. A young lieutenant, brave as hell, got hit trying to pull a medic out of danger. Elias's voice grew quieter, as though he were replaying it all in his mind. I ran in, pulled him back behind cover, but he kept yelling at me to go help the others, told me to leave him. An older man in the public gallery, wearing a faded Marine League jacket, instinctively leaned forward, his eyes lit up, as if he realized something monumental was unfolding. And what happened to Lieutenant Parker? Judge Parker's voice remained composed, but beneath the bench, her hands trembled slightly. We got him on a chopper, Elias replied, voice shrinking to a near confession. He made it to a hospital in Germany, I heard, but a few weeks later— Elias paused, his clouded eyes glistening. His convoy hit an IED. I don't know. I used to wonder if saving him just delayed the inevitable. A solemn hush blanketed the room, until the older Marine suddenly stood, pointing at Elias. That's him, he shouted, his voice like a rifle shot. Sergeant Carter, I was there that day. He pulled 6 of us out of that hell. The courtroom buzzed. Some turned to one another, others looked at Elias as if, for the first time, they truly saw him, not as a homeless man, but as a soldier who had survived. Judge Parker brought her gavel down, a firm strike though lacking her usual steel. Order, she said, but her voice no longer carried its cold authority. Silence returned. Elias looked down, clearly uncomfortable under the sudden spotlight, but the old Marine stood tall, eyes locked on the hero before him. Your Honor, he continued, his tone unwavering, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to speak. I was there. Carter ran straight into gunfire to drag the lieutenant out. He didn't just save one man. He kept our whole squad alive. The prosecutor rose, trying to regain control. Your Honor, I'm not disputing Mr. Carter's military service, but that has no relevance to the charges. No, Judge Parker cut in, her voice now firm, resolute. The court finds it entirely relevant. She set down her gavel, not to command, but as a gesture heavy with meaning, as if placing the weight of justice itself onto the scale between 2 lives. The court will recess for 10 minutes, Judge Parker declared. She turned to the bailiff. Please ensure Mr. Carter remains in the courtroom. But as she began to step down from the bench, something held her back. A rare moment. Her eyes met Elias's, no longer with the detached judgment of a magistrate, but with a gaze raw, human, and deeply personal. And Mr. Carter, she said softly, her voice layered with meaning, when I return, we need to talk. Not just about this case, but about things far beyond it. In her chambers, Olivia's defenses finally crumbled. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her lips, trying to stifle sobs that had been buried for 20 years. But then she took a deep breath, gathered herself, and picked up the phone. Colonel Matthews, this is Olivia Parker. Yes, it's been a long time, but I need a favor, and it's urgent. 10 minutes later, Olivia returned to the courtroom. But she wasn't alone. 3 Marines followed behind her, a colonel, a gunnery sergeant, and a young private carrying a carefully polished wooden box. A murmur spread across the room. The uniforms needed no introduction. They carried the weight of honor, of sacrifice, of memory. Elias, drawn by an unseen force, stood. His body was stooped, his joints weary, but his stance was steady. A soldier rising for the ideals that had never faded from his heart. Olivia resumed her seat at the bench, but this time She wore no glasses, and for the first time in her judicial career she did not speak as a representative of the law. She spoke as a human being. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice clear, eyes fixed on Elias, "I need to disclose a personal connection to this case." The courtroom held its breath. The man previously mentioned was my brother. A wave of stunned whispers rippled through the gallery. Elias furrowed his brow, then slowly his expression shifted. Recognition dawning. A surge of memory struck his eyes, distorting the lines on his face like time crashing into itself. 20 years ago, Olivia continued, my brother wrote about a sergeant who ran through enemy fire to rescue him after he was wounded. That sergeant stayed behind to cover the rest of the unit's retreat. That soldier was you, Elias Carter. From the audience, the Marine in the faded League jacket stepped forward again, this time without hesitation. "It's true," he said firmly. "I saw it with my own eyes. He took 2 bullets pulling that lieutenant out." Olivia gave a slight nod, then returned to the story. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed. At the funeral, his fellow Marines came to speak with my family. They told us of Jack's bravery, but they also spoke of the man who gave us those 2 extra weeks. Weeks we wouldn't have had without you. Her gaze fell upon Elias, now standing motionless. A torrent of emotions passed across his face. Disbelief, emotion, guilt, gratitude, all mingling in a current too strong to resist. "I tried to find you," Olivia said, her voice catching, "but the military told me you had re-enlisted. Years later they said you'd been discharged, but no one knew where you had gone." Elias stood in silence, his calloused hands clenched together as if trying to hold on to a part of himself that might shatter. "I never stopped searching," she continued. "And now, whether by fate or something greater, you've walked into my courtroom." Olivia turned to the man standing tall in his uniform beside her. "This is Colonel James Matthews," she announced, her tone firm yet reverent. "He commanded my brother's unit. Today he has something to share." Colonel Matthews stepped forward, his gaze steady, the kind forged by 1,000 formations. "Sergeant Carter," he began, his voice carrying the weight of a battlefield drum beat, "the Marine Corps has been looking for you for a very long time." The entire courtroom held its breath. As part of the Veterans Records Review Initiative, your personal file was among thousands re-examined. New intelligence regarding your missions in Iraq and Afghanistan has led to a reassessment of both your commendations and entitled benefits. The young Marine beside him opened the wooden box he carried. Inside lay a medal resting on deep blue velvet. Light glinted off the medal, shining like a long-buried act of heroism. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," Colonel Matthews continued, "in recognition of extraordinary bravery during the battle on April 17, 2004, we hereby award the Navy Cross to Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, United States Marine Corps." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The Navy Cross, the second highest military honor after the Medal of Honor, a symbol not only of valor, but of overdue recognition for a forgotten hero. "Much of your service at the time was classified," the colonel went on, "but what you did didn't just save Lieutenant Parker and 5 other Marines. It disrupted an ambush that could have wiped out an entire supply convoy. Your Silver Star has been officially upgraded," he concluded. Elias clenched his jaw, trying to maintain composure, but for the first time his stoic exterior cracked. "There must be some mistake," he whispered. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what I had to do." "There is no mistake, Sergeant," Colonel Matthews replied firmly. "And this honor, it's long overdue." From the gallery, a voice rang out, loud and clear, "Attention, officer present!" The silver-haired Marine stood at attention, his polished shoes gleaming like the spirit he carried. Then, like a rising tide, veterans, retired officers, and even civilians who understood the weight of sacrifice began to stand. One by one they raised their hands in a military salute, the quietest yet most powerful tribute a soldier can receive. Even the prosecutor, the man who once sought to push Elias out of the city, rose. His eyes wavered between duty and conscience, and in the end, he chose what was right. Judge Olivia Parker could no longer hold back. She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her robe. Her voice trembled but rang with clarity and resolve. In light of these extraordinary and deeply moving developments, I hereby declare all charges against Staff Sergeant Elias Carter are dismissed. She brought the gavel down, this time not to impose judgment, but to close a chapter of injustice and open a new one filled with hope. This court is adjourned. As the room began to empty, a gunnery sergeant approached Elias, holding a tablet. Sir, we've been trying to find you to update your VA file. Your disability rating has been reassessed. 100% service-connected. Retroactive to the date of discharge. Elias blinked, stunned. What does that mean? It means you'll receive all back pay owed, lifetime health care, housing support, education benefits, everything you need to move forward. Ross stepped up, his expression unwavering. Our firm will make sure it's all processed immediately. No more delays, no more denials. From the back of the courtroom, Jimmy, the cook who once quietly left a loaf of bread for Elias, stepped forward, his eyes red. My dad used to tell me stories, he said, voice tight with emotion, about a Marine who saved his entire platoon. His name was Elias Carter, Jimmy choked out, tears streaming down his cheeks. And my father always told me, if I ever met that man, I should remember that I owe him everything. He extended his hand, trembling. I didn't know. I had no idea that man was you until today. The prosecutor, now visibly ashamed, walked toward Elias, his demeanor cautious. Sir, I truly didn't know. Please accept my sincerest apology for how this case was handled. In the middle of a room full of people standing in tribute, Elias stood, unassuming, silent, but the aura he exuded was no longer that of a forgotten, worn-down veteran. It was the rebirth of dignity, belief, and honor. Things he had carried quietly for years. Judge Olivia Parker stepped down from the bench. In that moment there was no distance, no authority, only a woman carrying unspeakable loss and deep gratitude. She stopped in front of Elias, her eyes full of emotion. My brother once told me about the words you said to him that day. Her voice dropped like a whisper from fate. No Marine gets left behind. Not while I'm alive. Then she smiled, though tears still shimmered at the corners of her eyes. Today, Staff Sergeant Carter, we finally kept that promise. To you. 2 weeks later, Elias Carter stood in front of a mirror. The reflection no longer showed a drifter in a threadbare jacket, but a veteran learning to embrace a new life. His small apartment, part of a veteran housing program, was quiet and modest, but for the first time in years, Elias felt like he belonged somewhere. On the wall, the only frame, the Navy Cross he'd just received, proudly displayed between 2 Purple Hearts and lost service medals, all painstakingly recovered by Ross from a storage auction long ago. A knock at the door pulled Elias from his thoughts. He opened it. Olivia stood there. No judge's robe, just herself, holding a small box. May I come in, Staff Sergeant Carter? Just call me Elias, he said with a humble smile. Then, call me Olivia, she replied, stepping gently inside. They sat across from each other in the simple living room, the silence between them thick with decades of unspoken truths. I brought something, Olivia said, opening the box. Inside was a bundle of old letters, tied with a faded silver ribbon. They're Jack's letters. He wrote home every week while deployed, and this one, she handed him a single letter, was written right after you saved his life. Elias took it, his hand trembling slightly. The handwriting was familiar, still crisp after all these years. Dear Mom and Dad, he began to read, his voice hoarse. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe, thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Carter did something I still can't believe. When our unit got ambushed, he charged into gunfire like it didn't exist. He refused to leave, even when I ordered him to. He just said, "No Marine gets left behind, not while I'm alive." Elias paused, his voice breaking. "People talked about you all the time," Olivia said softly. He said you were the Marine he admired most. "Help, detect, was a good officer," Elias replied, almost in a whisper. "Young, but he really cared about his men." Olivia looked around the apartment. "After Jack died, I went to law school," she said. "Veterans Court, housing programs. It all started with what my brother wrote about how the system forgets the very people who sacrifice for it." Elias bowed his head. "I'm no hero," he said, eyes distant. "I just did what had to be done." Olivia smiled. "Maybe. That's what people like you always say, but the rest of us? We never forget." "That's what heroes always say." Olivia smiled gently, her voice soft, like a lullaby for wounds that hadn't yet healed. She paused for a moment, then continued, her tone deeper. "There's one more thing you should know." She clasped her hands tightly before speaking, as if bracing herself to unlock a sacred memory. The day Jack was killed, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents who had attacked civilians. He volunteered. In his last letter home, he wrote that he wanted to live up to the example you had set. That sentence struck Elias like a bullet across time. Not a physical pain, but a piercing blow to the core of doubts he had carried for 2 decades. The nights spent sleeping on curbs, the bitter days when no one remembered his name. Suddenly, they all meant something. "He didn't die because of you," Olivia said, her voice rich with empathy, as if reading aloud the silent pain he'd never dared to speak. "He lived that way because of you?" The two of them sat in stillness, lives torn by war and grief, now unexpectedly connected. An invisible thread bound them together by honor, gratitude, and unspoken sacrifice. Outside the window, snow began to fall. Soft, patient flakes blanketed the city in white, as if nature itself were trying to soothe human wounds. Elias finally spoke, his voice raspy and low, nearly dissolving into breath. "All these years, I thought, no one remembered anymore, as if everything I'd done had been forgotten." Olivia nodded gently, her eyes brimming. "But it was never meaningless, not to Jack, not to the men you saved, and not to me." As Olivia rose to leave, she rested a hand lightly on Elias' shoulder. "Jack used to say a soldier's dignity isn't found in what they do in front of a crowd. It's in what they do when no one's watching. You lived that way, Elias. Even when the world forgot you, you stood tall." Elias looked up, and for the first time in years something different glinted in his eyes. Not the sadness of a forgotten man, but the faint light of reclaimed pride. "Someone still remembers my name," he whispered. "After all these years, someone still remembers." And in that moment something long shattered inside him began to heal. Not only within Elias Carter, but within millions of others. Those who gave everything and silently waited to be seen. Because not every hero needs medals or glory. Some, after saving others, spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save them in return. And sometime the only thing a person truly needs isn't celebration, but someone, anyone, to stop, look them in the eye, and say, "I remember you."